Chapter 2476, Ling Han's Breakthrough. Chapter 2476, Ling Han's Breakthrough. The celestial seed mark inside Ling Han's body had already been nearing perfection. In fact, it might have already become perfect, but there had simply been no urgent need for him to advance, so he had kept holding it off until now. Yet, he was being relentlessly hunted by Dongfang Rui and the two celestial kings, and this enraged him immensely. At the same time, it also stoked a strong desire for him to break through. He wanted to become a celestial king, and then he wanted to pummel those bastards. His celestial seed was most likely already perfect, flawless. There was no need to nurture it any further. However, breaking through to become a first heaven celestial king was a matter of grave importance, one from which there was no turning back. It was because of this that he was being so utterly careful, and it was because of this that he had delayed breaking through for so long. However, with Ling Han's personality, once he made up his mind, he would never hesitate again. He immediately started to break through. He loosened his cultivation, and his aura instantly rose explosively. Dark clouds gathered overhead, with arcs of lightning cracking amid them. Heavenly tribulation was forming. This was a celestial king tribulation. However, because Ling Han was so powerful, it didn't appear like an ordinary celestial king tribulation at all. Instead, it looked like the tribulation of a second heaven celestial king. Crack! A bolt of lightning slammed down, transforming into a giant that had a razor-sharp sword in its hand. It viciously slashed down at Ling Han. With a roar, Ling Han fearlessly charged forth. At the same time, he also had to solidify the celestial seed mark in his mind, transforming it into a real and tangible seed. He then had to borrow the power of heavenly tribulation to nurture it. As for how much it could grow, this would be up to his talent and luck. In fact, it was during this stage that celestial kings would enjoy the fastest growth and development. Afterward, their advance would slow down significantly. Ling Han unleashed his celestial physique of time. These few hours were far too important to him, so he couldn't afford to waste a single second. Not only that, but he even needed to do everything he could to extend this time. Boom! He was immediately struck by heavenly tribulation, which caused his entire body to disappear. Meanwhile, a huge crater appeared in the ground, measuring a whopping 300 meters deep. However, in the next instant, Ling Han immediately dashed out from the crater, soaring into the sky. He was fighting a heaven-defying battle. In fact, facing heavenly tribulation here put Ling Han at a huge disadvantage. This was because he was being suppressed by the purple light, causing his battle prowess to drop significantly. He was completely no match for heavenly tribulation. However, even though he knew this, he still chose to advance here. There was naturally a good reason for this. The more difficult the circumstances, the greater the benefits if he succeeded in overcoming the odds. Moreover, Ling Han also wanted to know whether the purple light would be targeted by heavenly tribulation for interfering. After all, it was rumored that this purple light was emitted by the vegetation of this place. If heavenly tribulation targeted them, then even these plants would have to face a tribulation. In the center of these ruins, there were also a large number of celestial kings battling with these plants. Thus, would they be dragged into the mess as well? That would surely be a lively scene. However, it was a shame that heavenly tribulation wasn't enraged by the interfering purple light. This disappointed Ling Han greatly. Ling Han continued to resist heavenly tribulation with his full strength. Otherwise, this second heaven celestial king tier tribulation could potentially kill him. It was true that he liked to take risks, but he definitely had no desire to commit suicide. Meanwhile, he continued to rapidly solidify the celestial seed mark in his mind. Rumble. Heavenly tribulation unleashed its divine might, and it was as if it didn't want to allow a freak such as Ling Han to advance. Arcs of lightning crashed down, carrying with them the furious great Tao of lightning as they smashed into Ling Han. Ling Han was neither furious nor alarmed. Instead, he continued to focus on what was important. Under the furious barrage of lightning attacks, Ling Han was like a blade of grass swaying about in the storm. His body was covered in burns, and he looked much like a seared piece of wood. His vitality was as weak as could be, and it was as if he were about to die at any moment. His celestial seed mark was composed of countless threads, appearing as complex as possible. At this moment, only a single thread remained incomplete. As long as he completed this thread, it would no longer be a celestial seed mark. Instead, it would become a true celestial seed. Boom, boom, boom. Heavenly tribulation became increasingly violent. Once Ling Han advanced, his newfound strength would definitely shatter some kind of equilibrium. Thus, heaven and earth had to suppress him no matter what. Countless lightning giants surrounded Ling Han, furiously attacking him with their lightning-formed weapons. They wanted to kill him. Ling Han channeled the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, forcefully raising his defenses. He then abandoned all resistance, focusing his full attention on the final thread. Even though this was the final step, if he failed to complete it, his battle prowess as a celestial king would end up at least 10 times weaker. It was because of the critical importance of this step that Ling Han focused all of his attention on completing the final thread of the celestial seed mark. This was the most critical moment. Using his divine sense as a guide, he summoned a supremely radiant thread in the air, using it to connect 2 nodes, and completing the shell of his celestial seed. Boom! His aura rose explosively, and it was as if he possessed the power to easily crush all celestial bodies. In the distance, Ji Wuming, the Empress, and the others all watched on. "He's indeed extraordinary," Shichanzi said in astonishment. "He's only just become a celestial king, yet the might of heavenly tribulation is already comparable to that of second heaven celestial kings. If I hadn't witnessed it with my own eyes, I definitely couldn't have imagined it." Ji Wuming remained silent, yet his eyes burned with fighting spirit. Hua Furong shook her head, and said, "This brat still hasn't displayed his true abilities yet. I have a feeling that his greatest strength is his body art, not his power of regulations." Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. One had to realize that Ling Han had faced the tribulation of a second heaven celestial king upon advancing to the celestial king tier. This was a clear sign of his terrifying power. Yet, she was claiming that this wasn't Ling Han's greatest strength. How could they believe this? However, it was Hua Furong who had uttered these words, so who dared to doubt her? The Empress, Hu Niu, and bewitching maiden Ru all wore proud expressions. Ling Han was someone who could manipulate fundamental powers that only heavenly venerates could interact with. This was a power that far exceeded the level of regulations. Thus, it was only natural that he was as freakish as could be. Boom, boom, boom. Heavenly tribulation became increasingly violent, intent on killing Ling Han. Peng. The lightning giants attacked in unison, and Ling Han wasn't able to block them even though he had channeled the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. It wasn't long before his energy was exhausted, causing the golden sheen on his body to dim. Whoosh! The lightning giants attacked again, sending thousands of lightning blades at Ling Han. Not good. Everyone's expression changed drastically. This was the most critical moment for Ling Han. If he chose to block this attack, all of his previous efforts to solidify the celestial seed would have been in vain. However, if he continued to ignore heavenly tribulation, he might be ruthlessly struck to death. This was an incredibly difficult situation. However, a smile spread across Ling Han's face. He activated the great Tao of time, sending his divine sense into another realm that surpassed time itself. It was as if everything had become frozen in time. In fact, even the furious attacks of the lightning giants became as slow as a snail's crawl. The reactions of Ling Han's physical body naturally became extremely slow as well. However, his divine sense was transcendent above this. Most importantly, he only needed his divine sense to solidify the celestial seed. A brilliant ray of light formed in his divine sense, connecting the final 2 nodes. At this moment, his celestial seed was finally completed. Wang! A powerful aura burst out from Ling Han's body. He had already been extremely powerful to begin with, yet he now ascended to a new height. He was a celestial king. At this moment, Ling Han had genuinely broken through to the celestial king. His mind relaxed, and he immediately exited this transcendent state. Boom, 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 boom. The attacks of the lightning giants instantly accelerated, mercilessly slamming toward him. Come! Ling Han was fearless as he clenched his fists and charged forward. Chapter 2477, Boundlessly Powerful. Chapter 2477, Boundlessly Powerful. Peng, peng, peng. Ling Han forcefully lashed out, instantly throwing more than 1,000 punches. With his powerful body arts, he could indeed punch at such a rapid speed. One after another, the lightning giants were obliterated. Not a single one of them could withstand more than one strike from Ling Han. Shi Chanzi and Jiulan were transfixed with shock. Even though they could also defeat Second Heaven Celestial Kings, they definitely couldn't do so with just a few casual punches. However, Ling Han had obliterated thousands of such beings in an instant. Just what did this signify? Even the pupils of Ji Wuming and the Rain Emperor contracted. They were also stunned by Ling Han's overwhelming battle prowess. Only Hua Furong remained calm and unflustered. She was confident that she would be no weaker than this when she advanced to the Celestial King tier. First of all, Ling Han was indeed powerful. After becoming a Celestial King, his vitality index immediately shot up, exceeding 6,600. Second of all, however, the lightning giants weren't genuine living beings, and they were only a form of energy. Thus, they would immediately shatter in the face of overwhelming power. Even so, this didn't diminish Ling Han's might. His ability to obliterate thousands of lightning giants in an instant was a reflection of his unfathomable power. However, heavenly tribulation didn't give up. Rumble. Many more lightning giants materialized. However, it was impossible for their battle prowess to rise. Thus, all of them were still at the early stage of the second heaven. That being the case, how could they possibly threaten Ling Han? He casually lashed out, using punches and kicks to shatter the lightning giants. He was treating heavenly tribulation like his plaything. He was clearly only a first heaven celestial king, and he had clearly only just advanced. Once he advanced to the peak stage of the first heaven, would he be powerful enough to rival those at the early stage of the third heaven? Ling Han continued to nurture and grow his celestial seed. This was the period of time when it would grow the fastest. Once heavenly tribulation ended, this chance would also be gone. He fought against heavenly tribulation, transforming the lightning into nutrients to feed the growth of his celestial seed. This was the power of heaven and earth, so it was naturally beneficial to his celestial seed. The celestial seed sprouted at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. First, it was 2 leaves that grew. Then, it was the roots that extended, embedding themselves into Ling Han's divine sense as they continued to grow. Half a day passed, and heavenly tribulation finally dissipated. At this moment, Ling Han's celestial seed had already grown into a sapling. It was 15 centimeters tall, and it had a dozen or so lush green leaves. However, it radiated with an indescribably paramount aura. Ling Han shut his eyes, sensing the powerful energy within him. Judging from the appearance of his celestial seed, he was most likely still at the early stage of the first heaven. If there were 10 levels to the early stage, then he had already reached the 7th. He was closing in on the middle stage. This was simply astonishing. For most people, it would take at least several million years to advance through the early stage. However, if Ling Han took advantage of the peculiar light and peculiar fragrance of this place, he could potentially breeze through the early stage in just a few years. This comparison was as stark as could be. More importantly, what did this signify? Once he raised the limit of his cultivation, his body art would experience explosive growth. At the same time, his divine demon sword could also become a genuine celestial tool. Combined together, just what kind of lofty heights would his battle prowess reach? Ling Han excitedly retrieved his dimension scroll, yearning to extract its power to feed his body art. "Heh, so this is where you are," a familiar voice said with a cold chuckle. They looked over, only to see that Dongfang Rui and the 2 celestial kings had caught up to them again. They had naturally noticed the commotion caused by Ling Han's tribulation, and it was because of this that they had caught up so quickly. However, they had still arrived a little too late. Ling Han had already completed his tribulation. "You've broken through," Dongfang Rui exclaimed as he looked at Ling Han. There was a ribbon of peculiar light around Ling Han, and this was a clear sign that he was a celestial king. Dongfang Rui frowned upon seeing this. Trying to kill a fellow celestial king was far too difficult. Unless he was a third heaven celestial king, it would be almost impossible to suppress Ling Han. However, considering the immense suppression of this place, and taking into account the fact that Ling Han had only just advanced, rendering him unfamiliar with his newfound power, it was perhaps not an impossible task to kill him. Ling Han wore a beaming smile as he said, "It's time for payback." He then looked at the two second heaven celestial kings, and said, "If you two don't want to die, hurry up and piss off." The two celestial kings observed Ling Han's aura. He was clearly a first heaven celestial king, yet he made them feel a strong sense of apprehension. However, after hearing Ling Han's words, they were naturally very displeased. Regardless of how powerful he was still only a first heaven celestial king. Thus, where was his arrogance and confidence coming from? "I don't believe it. How can a measly first heaven?" Peng. Just as one of them opened their mouth to voice their displeasure, a streak of light flashed past their eyes, bringing with it a solid fist. This fist was incredibly fast. Just as he was about to raise his hands to block it, he suddenly discovered that he couldn't move even a single finger. The space around him had been completely restricted. He then felt a heavy weight strike his body, sending him flying into the distance. The other second heaven celestial king was also just about to condemn Ling Han's naivety and arrogance. However, he immediately bit his tongue upon seeing this. Fuck. Is this truly a newly advanced celestial king? With a single punch, he had sent the second heaven celestial king flying into the distance. This sent a chill through his body, and it also caused cold sweat to form on his forehead. Dongfang Rui was also astounded. He knew that Ling Han was a monarch star, so it was only natural that he would become mightily powerful after advancing to the celestial king. However, he hadn't imagined that he would become so boundlessly powerful. He had defeated a second heaven celestial king with a single punch. Ling Han cracked a grin as he turned to the remaining celestial king, saying, "What did you want to say? Come on, spit it out. I guarantee I won't stop you. I'll let you finish before I pummel you to death." This was a blatant threat. However, this was an extremely effective threat. The celestial king wiped the cold sweat from his brow, and he felt an urge to say something to get back at Ling Han. However, the scene of Ling Han's punch continued to replay in his mind, causing more sweat to pour down his body. Even though that punch had been incredibly quick, catching his companion off guard, his companion had still had some time to react. However, it was as if his body had been completely restricted, preventing him from moving even a single finger. The regulation of space. It was difficult for celestial kings to kill fellow celestial kings because once the weaker party felt threatened, they could immediately turn around and flee. It would be extremely difficult for their opponent to catch up to them. However, if the two parties were engaged in close-quarters combat, and one party had mastered the regulations of space, the situation would be completely different. Trying to flee while under the restriction of the regulations of space would be incredibly difficult. This restriction was equivalent to severing his path of retreat. Even if he fought with his full power, it was still very likely that he would be killed. The celestial king naturally didn't dare to make a squeak. He had never pledged his life to anyone, and he was more so a domineering force on this celestial path. As such, how could he sacrifice himself for someone else? Ling Han retracted his gaze from the celestial king. He then turned to look at Dongfang Rui. He didn't speak, yet Dongfang Rui's body started to involuntarily tremble. An indescribable chill washed over him. Even though he had dominated an entire generation before, enjoying the title of strongest under celestial kings, and even though his father was a heavenly venerate, what did this matter? At this moment, could the sealed emotion heavenly venerable charge here to save him? However, he was a resolute person, and he immediately removed the restriction on his cultivation as he retrieved his celestial tool. He started to break through to the celestial king tier. If he didn't become a celestial king, he would definitely be killed by Ling Han. At the same time, he could no longer rely on the two celestial kings. One had been severely wounded, and one didn't dare to move. A smile tugged at the corners of Ling Han's lips. With a flick of his right hand, The divine demon's sword materialized in his palm. Shio. With a toss, he threw the divine demon's sword forward, imbuing it with the regulations of time, regulations of space, and a myriad of other regulations. With a flash, the sword had already arrived before Dongfang Rui. Pu. It directly stabbed into his skull. Chapter 2478, Celestial King 2480, Subduing a Celestial King. Chapter 2478, Celestial King 2480, Subduing a Celestial King. Pu. The divine demon's sword carved a brilliant arc through the air before ruthlessly piercing Dongfang Rui's skull. Dongfang Rui's eyes widened in shock. If he raised his eyes slightly, he could see the swaying sword that was embedded in his head. Ling Han had controlled his power extremely well, with the sword only just piercing Dongfang Rui's divine sense. In fact, the tip of the sword didn't even come out the other side of his head. Thus, the sword swayed up and down, and it looked as if it might fall out at any moment. Dongfang Rui reached up to grab the divine demon sword, yet the energy in his body was draining at an alarming rate. At this moment, he was even weaker than a 3-year-old infant. "I know what you want to say," Ling Han said as he walked over. He wore an apathetic expression as he continued, "I'm sure you want to threaten me by bringing out your father again. So, let me save you some energy. I'm not afraid of your father, and there will come a day when I drag him off his throne and beat him until he becomes a dead dog. Remember this. When your father enters the afterlife, ask him if he died like this." Dongfang Rui wanted to speak, yet when he opened his mouth, he couldn't speak a word at all. He wanted to use his divine sense, yet his mind had already been pierced, so how could he do so? He could only emit a gagging sound as the vitality rapidly drained from his body. He couldn't accept this. As a monarch star, as the son of a heavenly venerate, as someone who had been sealed for several epochs so he could compete for the flawless celestial king, as someone who could become a heavenly venerate in the future. Now, however, he had been ruthlessly killed before he could even become a celestial king. If he had known that this would happen, he would have definitely chosen to become a 9th heaven celestial king first. After all, he would still have a sliver of a chance to become a heavenly venerate. It was just that this chance would be much smaller than if he obtained the flawless celestial seed. Now, however, everything was futile. "I'll be waiting for you," Dongfang Rui said, drawing on the last ounce of his power. This was the culmination of his resentment and despair. He refused to die before he uttered these words. This wasn't a grand agreement or whatnot, but was instead the greatest desire in his mind. He wished for Ling Han to die quickly. He wished for Ling Han to enter the afterlife with him. Ling Han smiled and said, "It's more realistic to wait for your father. Farewell." He pulled back the divine demon sword. Pu. A jet of blood sprayed into the air, after which Dongfang Rui fell limply to the floor. He was undoubtedly dead. However, his eyes were still wide open, showing his anger and despair. Beside him, even Ji Wuming and Hua Ferong had their mouths slightly open in astonishment. It was as if they could barely comprehend this. That was the son of a heavenly venerate. Not long ago, the Jiuwu heavenly venerate and the sealed emotion heavenly venerable had only agreed to stop hunting Ling Han because of heavenly venerate Wu Le's threat. If they dared to touch a single hair of Ling Han's, heavenly venerate Wu Le would kill all of their descendants. Both heavenly venerates had children, so they were naturally afraid of this threat. Now, however, Ling Han had killed Dongfang Rui. What could hold the sealed emotion heavenly venerable back now? However, after some careful thought, since Dongfang Rui could hunt Ling Han, why couldn't Ling Han kill him in return? Oh, so Dongfang Rui was immune to heavenly venerate Wu Le's rage? Ling Han wore a radiant smile. Heavenly venerate Wu Le would naturally hold the sealed emotion heavenly venerable back for him. In fact, even Zhu Heng would help him. This had been a battle between youths of the same generation, so life and death was their own responsibility. How could seniors interfere? The 2 second heaven celestial kings both trembled in terror. They were filled with petrification. Ling Han had killed the son of a heavenly venerate without so much as blinking his eyes. What were they worth? They exchanged a glance, and exclaimed, "Run!" While Ling Han's attention was elsewhere, they immediately made an attempt to flee. Since you've already come, why don't you stay for a while longer? Ling Han raised his hand, making a pressing motion at the two celestial kings. The regulations of time rumbled forth, detrimentally affecting their speed. The two celestial kings fled with all their might, yet they quickly discovered that they were moving as slow as a snail. In fact, even the falling leaves were moving faster than them. They were absolutely horrified. This was the regulation of time. Was this youth the reincarnation of a ninth heaven celestial king? He had only just advanced to the celestial king tier, so how did he possess such mastery over the regulations? Where had he found so much time to cultivate? We need to go all out, the two celestial kings roared. Boundless power of regulations surged from their bodies, instantly shattering the restriction of time. After all, at the celestial king tier, all regulations were equal. However, even though they shouted this, one of the celestial kings seized the opportunity to flee as the other continued to battle Ling Han. You! The battling celestial king was enraged. However, Ling Han wasn't worried at all. He smiled at his opponent, and said, "Rest assured, I won't let him escape." He then flicked his right hand. Shio! The divine demon sword shot forward, slicing through the air at an impressive speed. Pu! The divine demon sword instantly pierced the left shoulder of the fleeing celestial king. Under the immense momentum, he was sent crashing to the ground, where he was ultimately impaled. In fact, it was only because he had dodged in time that the sword had impaled his left shoulder. Otherwise, it would have directly pierced his heart, and the divine demon sword would have at least consumed his blood essence. "See, what did I tell you?" Ling Han mused to his struggling opponent. The celestial king trembled in terror. He felt like Ling Han wasn't a human at all. Instead, he was a demon from head to toe. How could he be so powerful? So be it if he was powerful. Most importantly, how was he so fearless? He was genuinely displaying no hesitation toward killing others. A thought flashed through his mind, and he immediately fell to one knee, stammering, I'm willing to submit to you, Lord. I'm willing to fight alongside you, my lord." He announced his surrender to Ling Han. This was an inconceivable sight. A second heaven celestial king was actually expressing his loyalty to a newly advanced celestial king. This was utterly comical. Ling Han reached over to pat the celestial king's shoulder. The celestial king was scared to death. He was afraid that Ling Han would suddenly attack and kill him. With each pat, his heart would shudder in fright. Fortunately, Ling Han didn't attack him. However, he couldn't relax at all, and cold sweat continued to flow down his body. Ling Han finally retrieved his hand with a smile, saying, "All right, you can follow me in the future. What's your name?" "Lord, this subordinate is called Fu Yuan." The celestial king had initially wanted to refer to himself as this lord. However, he realized this was far too arrogant, so he immediately changed to refer to himself as I. However, this also seemed inappropriate, so he settled for using the tone of a subordinate. After all, he was now a subordinate of Ling Han. "Lord." The celestial king who had been impaled by the divine demon sword also crawled up. However, he didn't dare to remove the divine demon sword. He ran up to Ling Han before dropping to one knee, saying, "This subordinate is called Cheng Dao. I'm also willing to serve my lord and offer up my measly strength." If the Dark Frost Celestial King saw this, he would definitely flare up in rage. Back then, Fu Yuan and Cheng Dao had only formed an alliance with him. Even though he had been the alliance leader, there had been no explicit hierarchy among them. Now, however, these two celestial kings were kneeling and announcing their servitude to Ling Han. This could naturally infuriate him to death. Ling Han smiled, and said, "Very well. Offer me a wisp of your divine senses, and I'll accept you as my underlings." The expressions of Fu Yuan and Cheng Fu changed drastically. Once they offered up their divine sense, even though their life wouldn't be in the hands of Ling Han would be able to easily find them using their divine sense. They wouldn't be able to hide anywhere. If Ling Han were ruthless enough, he could even shatter their divine senses and severely wound them. However, at this moment, could they reject this offer? If they did, death would be their only fate. However, they didn't want to die. Chapter 2479, Breaking Through Together. Chapter 2479, Breaking Through Together. Courage had nothing to do with strength. The rage of a commoner could cause blood to flow 5 steps 1. However, as powerful as a celestial king might be, there would also be times when they bowed their heads to save their skin. Ling Han charged back with Cheng Dao and Fu Yuan, destroying 7 of the Dark Frost Celestial King's camps in just half a month. Only then were they willing to stop for a rest. Cheng Dao and Fu Yuan naturally did most of the hard work. They were afraid that Ling Han would be dissatisfied with them and suspect that they were still loyal to the Dark Frost Celestial King. Ling Han temporarily stopped his advance. This was because they had already occupied more than 9 camps. Occupying any more than this would be useless. Moreover, if they continued to advance, they would get closer and closer to the Dark Frost Celestial King. Even though they had greatly hurt the Dark Frost Celestial King at this moment, they still hadn't crossed his bottom line yet. However, if they occupied all but 2 or 3 of his camps, he would definitely be forced into action. He would stop at nothing to charge forward and fight with them. At that time, things would become much more troublesome. After all, Ling Han's vitality index was still far from reaching 8,000. Moreover, the others indeed needed some time to rest. Feeling pressured by Ling Han's advance, Hua Furong, Ji Wuming, the Rain Emperor, and the others also started to consider breaking through. Their celestial seed marks were also nearing a state of perfection. Of course, this notion of perfection differed for each person. It was dependent on their resources and knowledge. Thus, it was possible that their notions of perfection were completely different. Meanwhile, Ling Han chose to stabilize his cultivation first. He would then forge the divine demon sword into a true celestial tool. Afterward, he would advance the level of his body art. By doing all this, he was confident that he would be able to rival a 3rd heaven celestial king. In fact, with the suppression of the purple light, perhaps even those at the peak stage of the 3rd heaven were no match for him. This was because his body arts wouldn't be affected by the purple light. This was his own power, and it wasn't reliant on the power of regulations. 1 day, 2 days. 1 month, 2 months. 1 year, 10 years. Time flew by. Ling Han and the others were all fully concentrated on cultivating. They were self-aware, and they understood that they were too weak to charge into the center of the ruins at this moment. They had to become stronger first. 90 years later, Ling Han finally managed to fully stabilize his cultivation. At the same time, he also reached the middle stage of the 1st heaven, causing his battle prowess to rise significantly again. He started to reforge the divine demon sword. Using the greatest eternity everlasting physique, he experienced 1,000 days when others only experienced 1. The divine demon sword started to change drastically, with symbols appearing on it one after another. They all radiated with an indescribably domineering aura. Celestial tool. At this moment, Ling Han no longer needed to funnel his power into the divine demon sword. With a single thought, the divine demon sword would actively attack his opponents, unleashing a boundless might. Because it was so sharp, and because it was indestructible, even 3rd heaven celestial kings wouldn't dare to face its might. Ling Han wore a faint smile. Just by relying on the divine demon sword alone, he would already possess the right to challenge a 3rd heaven celestial king. However, it was never his habit to rely on external power. This was even though he had raised the divine demon sword from the very beginning. Only his own strength was true strength. He had never forgotten this. He started to practice his body arts. With the dimension scroll in his hands, he started to channel the model given to him by Wally. Mysterious formulas continued to float through his mind, allowing him to extract energy from the dimension scroll. Boom! Paramount power surged into his body. However, he was still unable to grasp this power. Even so, it tempered his muscles, bones, and meridians as it flowed through him. Rumble! Heavenly tribulation was on the verge of forming again. Void particle energy was the most fundamental energy of the Genesis world, and theoretically speaking, only heavenly venerates could wield this energy. Moreover, whenever a heavenly venerate appeared, they would be targeted by heaven and earth. Now that he was interacting with void particle energy, Ling Han was no exception to this rule. Heavenly tribulation formed overhead, yearning to strike him down. Ling Han flirted with danger as he continued to grow his strength. However, after becoming a celestial king, each step forward would require an exorbitant amount of time. This was an extremely slow process. Another 100 years passed, yet Ling Han was still unable to raise the power of his body arts to its limits. There was still room for improvement. Meanwhile, Hua Furong, Ji Wuming, the Empress, and the others all advanced to the Celestial King tier one after another. They all became significantly stronger. The most terrifying among them was none other than Hua Furong. Even though she had only just advanced to the first heaven, she could already rival Ling Han. She indeed lived up to her title as the #1 celestial maiden in history. Of course, this was under the condition that Ling Han didn't use his divine demon sword or body arts. In reality, regulations were only tools that helped them become heavenly venerates. Upon becoming a heavenly venerate, what they would wield was the fundamental power of the Genesis world, which could be used in any one of the realms with the exception of first-tier heavenly venerates. However, regulations were different. If a 9th heaven celestial king from the celestial realm ran over to the foreign realm, they would be nothing but trash. Ling Han had already interacted with the fundamental power of the Genesis world in advance. With regards to this, he had already surpassed Hua Furong by a huge margin. When they reached the peak stage of the 9 heaven and started to cultivate toward the heavenly venerable tier, Ling Han's advantage would become far more obvious. He would leave Hua Furong in the dust. Meanwhile, Ji Wuming also continued to stay on Ling Han's heels. If they battled at the same cultivation level, he would be no weaker than Ling Han. Again, this was under the condition that Ling Han didn't use his divine demon sword or body arts. Right now, they weren't in a hurry to set off. Instead, those who needed to chose to stabilize their cultivation, and those who needed to chose to continue their advance. Upon witnessing the sparring sessions between Ling Han and the others, the final bit of vexation in Cheng Dao's and Fu Yuan's mind vanished. These people were absolute freaks. Just how crazy was this? These people had only just become celestial kings, yet they were all far more powerful than them. How was this fair? The Empress, Hu Niu, and the Rain Emperor also advanced to the celestial king tier. However, they were slightly weaker than the freaks in Ji Wuming and Hua Furong. With that said, this was only by a little bit. The gap between them wasn't big at all. Right now, there were still 500 years until the 10,000-year limit. After some discussions, they decided to rest and cultivate for another 100 years. After everyone's cultivation was stabilized, they would set off for the center of the ruins. From the information they had gathered, none of the forces had conquered the last few areas yet. They were all locked in a stalemate. Thus, there was no need to hurry. Ling Han continued to refine his body arts. Even though a dimension scroll could help a mortal human become a heavenly venerate, signifying the immense energy that it possessed, the manner in which Ling Han was using it was extremely inefficient. As he continually extracted the energy, it would only flow through his body once before dissipating back into heaven and earth. Could this last until he became a 9-heaven celestial king? It would be extremely difficult. He wondered if such dimension scrolls existed in the transcendent dimension. Theoretically speaking, that dimension was being attacked by hysteria and at risk of collapse at any moment, so it would most likely develop a sense of danger. This would then result in more heavenly venerates being produced. Thus, it was possible for dimension scrolls to exist in abundance. He would worry about this later. Ling Han continued to extract power from the dimension scroll to refine his body arts. However, even though he had already accelerated time for himself, his progress was still extremely slow. Perhaps it would really take him another 100 years to reach the limit. However, was this truly slow? He was at the Celestial King tier, where advancing one minor tier every epoch wouldn't be considered slow. Meanwhile, he had only spent several hundred years. Even accounting for the accelerated time, he had only spent a few 100,000 years. Yet, his body arts could already rival those at the 2nd heaven or even 3rd heaven. Just how terrifying was this? In the blink of an eye, 100 years had already passed. Compared to when they had just broken through, they were all much more powerful. This was largely thanks to the peculiar light and peculiar fragrance, which allowed them to rapidly stabilize their cultivation and even see improvement. Time for battle. Chapter 2480, Profuse Apology. Chapter 2480, Profuse Apology. If Ling Han and the others could only be regarded as troublemakers when they arrived here several hundred years ago, they could definitely be regarded as mighty dragons now. In terms of the power of regulations alone, Ling Han and Hua Furong were tied in the first place. They both possessed a vitality index of almost 8,000. However, if body arts were taken into account, Ling Han would definitely be the most powerful among them. His vitality index would exceed 8,000, reaching a whopping 8,400. This was already approaching the level of celestial kings at the peak stage of the third heaven. Of course, this was only theoretically speaking. How could celestial kings be ordinary people? After all, even King Tiers found it almost impossible to become celestial kings. At a minimum, they had to be Emperor Tiers. Thus, the vitality index of third heaven celestial kings would most likely be around 8,600. This was slightly more powerful than Ling Han. However, if he took into account the divine demon sword as well, Ling Han was confident that he could rival any third heaven celestial king. Right now, his weakness was surprisingly his physique. After becoming a celestial king, he required an exorbitant amount of treasures to practice the indestructible heaven's scroll. Even though he had taken the treasures of many ancestral kings a while ago, he had already consumed most of them. Moreover, these were treasures from a different realm, so they were still a little bit different. In any case, they weren't sufficient to fund his current cultivation needs. Only when he left the celestial path, and perhaps only when he ventured to the transcendent dimension, could he cultivate the indestructible heaven's scroll to a higher level. Even so, his physique had still genuinely advanced to the celestial king tier. His defense index had exceeded 5,000, and this was still extremely astonishing. Before they could set off, a significant piece of news reached their ears. After so many years of vicious battle, the various forces had finally managed to conquer the remaining areas. According to rumors, these central structures were fairly extraordinary. Not only could they resist the purple light, but they even possessed other peculiar abilities. Some could automatically refine alchemical pills as long as the necessary ingredients were provided, while others could refine tools as long as the necessary materials were put in. Some could even attack by themselves, launching beams of light that could obliterate all matter. Right now, the situation was already settled, and the various forces were conducting the final round of talks. They had reached a ceasefire agreement, and they had all agreed to fight for the paramount treasure in the central region together. This also signified that the Dark Frost Celestial King was finally free to target Ling Han and the others. This information had been gathered by Fu Yuan and Cheng Dao. Their faces were scrunched up in anxiety. This time, they would definitely lose the opportunity to leave the celestial path. In fact, even their forces on the celestial path would be targeted by the Dark Frost Celestial King. In the future, they might become lonesome souls. Even though they knew that Ling Han and the others were extremely powerful, they could at most only defeat those at the second heaven. If they encountered third heaven celestial kings, they would definitely suffer defeat. What they were most afraid of eventually arrived. Several days later, a messenger came bearing a letter from the Dark Frost Celestial King. His words were extremely arrogant and haughty, and he demanded that Ling Han and the others go and profusely apologize to him. Otherwise, he would lock the transfer formation in the center of the ruins, forcing them to stay on the celestial path forever. This was a ruthless tactic. Although it was necessary to travel through the celestial path to become a celestial king, there was only a limited amount of resources here, so the scope of what they could achieve was also limited. Ling Han and the others were all monarch stars or supreme monarch stars, so if they were trapped here forever, this would definitely be a worse fate than killing them. If you understand, then give me a reply, the messenger said in a haughty tone. Even though he was only at the ascending origin tier, he stood extremely tall and proud before the group of celestial kings. It was as if he were the true celestial king. In his eyes, since the Dark Frost Celestial King had cast his gaze over, these newly advanced celestial kings could only wet their pants and fall to their knees in fright, begging for forgiveness. As a messenger, he naturally had to accept Ling Han and the others' surrender first. Ling Han smiled faintly as he raised his right hand. Boom! A ball of flames materialized, instantly incinerating the letter. However, a powerful aura rose from the ashes, transforming into a fist that smashed at Ling Han. This was the handiwork of a celestial king. They had imbued their paramount power into the letter. Even though this fist couldn't unleash the true power of a third heaven celestial king, it was still immensely powerful. Indeed, it wasn't an attack that ordinary first heaven celestial kings could block. In the eyes of the Dark Frost celestial king, if Ling Han dared to destroy his letter, he would punish the other party with this powerful punch. Even if it didn't strike Ling Han, it would still force him to become extremely disheveled as he dodged desperately. This was a display of strength. This was the lofty might of a third heaven celestial king. Ling Han extended a finger and lightly tapped at the fist. Pa! The fist immediately crumbled, unable to hurt even a single hair of Ling Han's. If the Dark Frost celestial king had personally come to attack him, Ling Han would definitely have faced him in a solemn manner. However, this was simply an attack that had been imbued in a piece of paper. Thus, did he need to treat it seriously? Go back and tell your master. I'll return the favor in a few days' time, Ling Han said with a smile. The messenger was transfixed with shock. He had personally heard the Dark Frost celestial king say that if Ling Han dared to destroy the letter, he would definitely suffer grave consequences. However, even though these words rang in his ears, his eyes had witnessed a completely different result. Heavens! Just how terrifying is this youth? He hurriedly nodded in reply, turning around as quickly as he could to leave. At this moment, he truly wished that he had wings to soar away from Ling Han as quickly as he could. He rapidly made his way back, and when he arrived at a camp controlled by the Dark Frost Celestial King, he used a special method to communicate with the Dark Frost Celestial King. "When is the brat coming?" the Dark Frost Celestial King asked. In his eyes, he had Ling Han and the others in the palm of his hand. They had no option but to yield. The messenger stammered in apprehension. He truly didn't know where to begin. Why are you hesitating? Hurry up and answer me, the Dark Frost Celestial King said in a solemn voice. He absolutely despised subordinates who were slow and ineffective. The messenger gritted his teeth and said, "That person burnt the letter, my lord." The Dark Frost Celestial King faltered upon hearing this. Just how audacious were these outsiders? They even dared to destroy his letter. However, he immediately started to roar with laughter. That person had most likely been wounded by his attack, right? Even if he hadn't, he would still have wound up disheveled. He nodded, and asked, how severely was he wounded? The messenger wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and replied, he was completely unscathed. He also said that he would return the favor in a few days. The Dark Frost Celestial King faltered again. What? Completely unscathed? How is this possible? Even though that attack hadn't possessed his full strength, it had still been the attack of a third heaven celestial king, after all. Just how overwhelming had it been? Are you trying to trick me? The Dark Frost Celestial King chided in a cold voice. Perhaps you didn't deliver the letter at all? Was this subordinate so afraid of death that he didn't even visit Ling Han and the others? Was he making up excuses now? This subordinate wouldn't dare. This subordinate wouldn't dare, the messenger exclaimed as he hurriedly fell to his knees. Even though they were extremely far away from each other, it was as if he could still feel the burning rage of the Dark Frost Celestial King. This terrified him to the core. He continued to say that this was indeed what had transpired, and that he wasn't lying about anything at all. Only then did the Dark Frost Celestial King silently fall in thought. He also believed that this subordinate wouldn't dare to trick him, especially under his interrogation. However, how could a measly first heaven celestial king who had only just advanced possess such great strength? Are there monarch stars among the outsiders? He murmured to himself. A while ago, he had dispatched 2 celestial kings along with Dongfang Rui to hunt Ling Han down. Now, however, Ling Han was still alive and healthy, while there was no news about the 3 people who had been pursuing him. This was proof enough of Ling Han and his companion's strength. However, regardless of how powerful he is, how can he rival a third heaven celestial king? I'll be waiting for him. Chapter 2481 First Battle Against Third Heaven Celestial King. Chapter 2481 First Battle Against Third Heaven Celestial King. Ling Han and the others set off for the center of the ruins. Each time they came across a camp, they would ask whether it belonged to the Dark Frost Celestial King. If it did, they would directly conquer it. If it didn't, they would act according to the people's attitude. If they were friendly, they would simply borrow some rooms to rest. If they were hostile, they would directly take over the camp. Half a month passed, and the Dark Frost Celestial King lost another 5 camps. Right now, only a measly 4 camps remained under his control. This caused his expression to become dark and furious. After tasking his 3 remaining Second Heaven Celestial Kings with defending the main base, he snuck away to search for Ling Han and the others. He was extremely quick, and it only took him 7 days to reach his 3rd camp. He stayed there, silently waiting for Ling Han and the others to arrive. It wasn't that he didn't want to go to the 4th camp, but rather that it had already fallen. At this time, the Dark Frost Celestial King naturally understood what Ling Han meant by returning the favor. This enraged him to no end. However, with so many of his camps being defeated, it was quite surprising that not a single wisp of his separated divine sense had returned to inform him of what had happened. This confused him greatly. However, he didn't pay much heed to this, either. As long as Ling Han and the others dared to attack this camp, he would teach these outsiders a lesson. He would teach them that it was seniors like him who controlled the celestial path. Elsewhere, Ling Han and the others were extremely relaxed as they wandered around. Right now, all of the structures that they had taken control of were vertically aligned. Even though they had already exceeded the maximum of 9, such structures could still bring them great benefits. If they obtained enlightenment, they would stop to comprehend it and also rest for a few days. They were in no hurry to reach the center of the ruins. After all, there were still several hundred years left. Several days passed, and they set off once again. The suppression of the purple light brought great discomfort to all of them. Moreover, the more time that passed, the more powerful the suppression of the purple light became. Thus, they started to hasten their speed. In just 2 days, they saw a building appear before them. This building was 5 stories tall, and it radiated with a ceramic glaze that prevented the purple light from infiltrating it. Ling Han walked over with a smile, and asked, "Can I ask you a question? Is this the territory of the Dark Frost Celestial King?" "Impudence! You actually dare to utter the Lord's name," the guards immediately chided. Ling Han nodded before turning around, and saying, "All right, this is also Dark Frost's territory. Lord Cheng. Lord Fu." The eyes of the guards involuntarily widened when they saw Fu Yuan and Cheng Dao. What in the world was going on? Why were the 2 celestial kings trailing behind like subordinates? Moreover, they were at the very end, signifying that they had no standing at all. Cheng Dao and Fu Yuan both wore awkward expressions. Even though they had belonged to the Dark Frost Celestial King's force before, they had both enjoyed a transcendent status. They hadn't been subordinates of the Dark Frost Celestial King. Now, however, their situation was completely different. They genuinely felt ashamed to face others. A Celestial King walked over, and asked, "Friend Cheng, Friend Fu, what's the meaning of this?" There was a single ribbon of iridescent light around him. His name was Zundong, and he was the guarding Celestial King of this building. Cheng Dao and Fu Yuan both ignored him as if they hadn't heard his question. Firstly, there was indeed no need for them to explain. Secondly, Ling Han was their master, so they didn't dare to supersede his command, either. Ling Han smiled, and said, "This territory is mine now. Are you going to leave by yourself, or do you want me to send you away?" "How audacious," someone said in a cold voice. It was as if this voice had traveled over from the depths of the world. "Dark Frost Celestial King," Cheng Dao and Fu Yuan exclaimed in unison. Even though they were mentally prepared to meet him sooner or later, they hadn't expected to come across him so soon. A Celestial King appeared at the entrance, with 3 ribbons of iridescent light hovering around his body. Boundless bursts of ice-cold aura also gathered around him, appearing as terrifying as could be. He was none other than the Dark Frost Celestial King. Ling Han roared with laughter, and said, "After obliterating so many wisps of your divine sense, I'm finally able to meet you in person. It was truly difficult to find you. Young man, you think I won't dare to kill you just because you have a powerful background in the outside world?" the Dark Frost Celestial King asked in a cold voice. He was one of the most powerful beings on the celestial path, so he never needed to consider the consequences when he did something. Moreover, if he obtained the huge opportunity this time, he would no longer need to worry about Ninth Heaven Celestial Kings, Heavenly Venerates, or whatnot. Ling Han shrugged, and said, "If I truly bring a Heavenly Venerate over, and you still dare to speak like this, I'll truly respect your bravery. In any case, enough with the nonsense. Since you're finally here, I'll give you 2 options to choose from. The first option is to become my subordinate, and the second option is death. Alright, you can choose one now." Ha ha ha. The Dark Frost Celestial King tilted his head back and roared with laughter. Where was this brat getting his confidence from? "I'll go," Hua Furong said as she charged over. She immediately swallowed a subduing purple fruit. They had obtained several of these fruits on their way here, so each person had no fewer than 5 opportunities to unleash explosive power. She wasn't underestimating her opponent, and she directly retrieved her celestial tool as well. An ancient mirror hovered above her head, pulsating with the power of regulations. "Fire!" she roared. The origin flames of heaven and earth burst forth, transforming her entire body into one of flames. These were devastating flames that could even incinerate regulations themselves. The Dark Frost Celestial King was astonished upon seeing this. This young girl was clearly just a First Heaven Celestial King, so why was her power making him feel a sense of apprehension? Her battle prowess was indeed inferior to his. However, after taking into account her celestial tool, she was definitely strong enough to threaten him. Was she truly a First Heaven Celestial King? Hua Furong charged over, and the Dark Frost Celestial King had no option but to meet her attacks. He summoned the Great Tao of Water, creating a streak of black water wherein each drop was as heavy as a planet. These were incredibly deadly droplets. Peng! The 2 Celestial Kings exchanged a blow. Sure enough, Hua Furong's battle prowess left her at a disadvantage. However, thanks to her celestial tool, she was easily able to rival her opponent. Ancient symbols continued to appear in the ancient mirror, emitting a mysterious chant that was seemingly divulging the most primordial secrets of heaven and earth. The ancient mirror glowed with a destructive radiance that even the Dark Frost Celestial King didn't dare to face head-on. He had to block its attacks with his full strength, or else he would also suffer severe injuries. The Dark Frost Celestial King was completely unable to suppress his opponent. His defenses were breached by Hua Furong, and the 2 of them continued their vicious battle on the building. Boom, boom, boom. Just the shock waves of their attacks alone were powerful enough to frighten Second Heaven Celestial Kings. Ling Han and the others were in no hurry to interfere. They easily shooed the others away before finding the control core of the building. Ling Han marked it with a wisp of his divine sense, and this allowed him to connect all of their conquered camps. If someone else completed this step, this building would be treated as part of another force. This was a fairly comical scene. The battle had yet to conclude, yet the building had already changed owners. The Dark Frost Celestial King was both astonished and enraged. With a roar, he turned around to flee. He was giving up. Of course he was giving up. Even his camp had been conquered by his enemies, and Hua Furong's battle prowess was also immensely powerful. He wasn't confident that he could suppress her. Moreover, there were so many people on Ling Han's side, so what would he do if there were a few more powerful Celestial Kings? Thus, he decided to retreat. He would return after he found a few helpers. Ling Han didn't pursue him. He could escape from this camp, but could he escape from this realm? In any case, the Dark Frost Celestial King definitely wouldn't abandon his final camp. At that time, they would head over there to find him. They rested for a brief while to dispel the effects of the purple light. Afterward, they would continue to advance, intent on settling their differences with the Dark Frost Celestial King in a single breath. 2 days later, they absorbed some peculiar light and peculiar fragrance again, not only improving their cultivation significantly, but even dispelling the negative effects of the purple light. Thereupon, they set off again. Chapter 2482, Bearing Down. Chapter 2482, Bearing Down. Ling Han and the others continued to advance, conquering another 2 of the Dark Frost Celestial King's camps. Now, the Dark Frost Celestial King only had a line camp remaining. However, this was also his most valuable camp. Sitting in this final tower, the Dark Frost Celestial King wore an ice-cold expression. In fact, it was so dark that it was as if water were about to drip from his face. Ever since attaining Tao, when had he faced such a difficult situation before? He was a third heaven celestial king, yet, he had actually been forced into such an awkward situation. Fortunately, he had only snuck out in secret. Initially, his goal had been to prevent others from noticing that he had left so that his main camp wouldn't be attacked by others. Now, however, he had managed to conceal a great embarrassment. He had already targeted them himself, yet he was still unable to suppress a few first heaven celestial kings. If others learned of this, would he not become a huge joke? However, he couldn't help but frown when he recalled the battle prowess of Hua Furong. Celestial kings with celestial tools truly possessed a completely different battle prowess. This was also the reason why so many celestial kings wanted to obtain a celestial tool no matter what. He didn't reckon that he could suppress Hua Furong even if he fought her again. Fortunately, the 12 different forces had already reached an agreement a few days ago, forming an alliance to target anyone who dared to think about attacking any of the 12 towers. If one tower was attacked, the others would all send reinforcements. In other words, even if Hua Furong and the others attacked him, he could easily call for reinforcements. However, to call for reinforcements to defend against a few first heaven celestial kings was far too embarrassing. No. He shook his head upon thinking of this. However, a glimmer immediately appeared in his eyes. Right. Why couldn't he invite the celestial kings from the other forces over? He could use the excuse of holding a meeting. That way, if Hua Furong and the others attacked, he was certain that the other celestial kings would also step forward to help him. At that time, he could drag all of these celestial kings to his side. What a brilliant plan! He immediately sent invitations to the leaders of the various forces. They all gave him face, and before long, 19 third heaven celestial kings arrived one after another. Why were there 19 of them? Because some third heaven celestial kings hadn't reached the peak stage yet, they had already been in teams of 2 when they had arrived at this central region. Being as sly as he was, the Dark Frost Celestial King didn't let slip any information about Ling Han and the others. He maintained a demeanor of calm, and he continued to engage in fruitful conversations with the other celestial kings. However, he was secretly hoping that Ling Han and the others would arrive as quickly as possible. This was because he couldn't keep the 19 celestial kings here forever. After all, they weren't the only third heaven celestial kings on the celestial path. This was also why they had to form an alliance. Otherwise, what did it matter regardless of how many second heaven and first heaven celestial kings there were? Did they need to be afraid? The Dark Frost Celestial King didn't need to wait for long before Ling Han and the others arrived. Lord, an ascending origin tier elite exclaimed as he ran over with a flustered expression. The Dark Frost Celestial King could naturally guess what was happening. However, he kept his emotions in check, and he instead chided in anger. Why are you acting all flustered? Lord, some people have charged over, and they say they want you to. The ascending origin tier cultivator wanted to continue, yet he didn't dare to keep going. Speak, the Dark Frost Celestial King said with a frown. The ascending origin tier cultivator mustered his courage, and said, they want you to clean your neck and go out to accept death. Oh! Who dares to be so audacious? They actually dare to seek the life of Brother Dark Frost, a third heaven celestial king said with a smile. He was extremely short, yet he was also astonishingly plump at the same time. This caused him to look like a round ball. His earlobes were also massive, and they hung all the way down to his shoulder. The Dark Frost Celestial King smiled coldly, and said, "It's most likely just a few clowns. Dark Frost, that's no way to speak. Since they dare to come here to challenge you, they most likely have some strength. Why don't we head over to meet them?" Another Third Heaven Celestial King said. He was the polar opposite of the Celestial King who had spoken just then. He was tall and skinny, and he looked much like a length of bamboo. "That's right, let's go out to meet them," the other Celestial Kings all said. "With all of us heading over, let's hope that we don't frighten them to death." They all joked and laughed as they headed out. On the celestial path, they were most likely an invincible group of people. Thus, they were naturally fearless. It wasn't long before they arrived at the foot of the tower, only to see the guards collapsed and unconscious. Meanwhile, a group of youths stood tall and proud, radiating with an extraordinary aura. This tower wasn't one that specialized in defense or offense, and it was because of this that it had been breached so easily. In fact, this was a tower that specialized in tool refinement. The Ninth Descent Celestial King hummed in surprise. This was because he saw Ling Han in the crowd. This was the youth for whom he had done a favor in the past. At that time, Ling Han had only been a pseudo-celestial king. However, even though he had only been a pseudo-celestial king, he had already possessed the power to suppress a First Heaven Celestial King. Now that he had become a Celestial King, just how much had his battle prowess risen? Perhaps he could suppress Second Heaven Celestial Kings? Could he perhaps rival Third Heaven Celestial Kings? If it were anyone else, the Ninth Descent Celestial King definitely wouldn't ponder this. After all, wasn't this a silly daydream? Who didn't understand the insurmountable gulf between each heaven? How could a measly First Heaven Celestial King challenge a mighty Third Heaven Celestial King? Was this a joke? However, this person was Ling Han. He had already displayed his freakish abilities while at the pseudo-celestial king tier. Moreover, without enough confidence, would Ling Han have charged over? He would stand aside to observe the situation. In any case, Ling Han still owed him a favor. As such, the initiative was in his hands. "Dark Frost, I've come to collect your head," Ling Han roared. This time, he didn't allow Hua Furong to charge in before him. In fact, he had also seen the jittery excitement of Ji Wuming, the Rain Emperor, Hu Niu, and the others, so he immediately stepped forward first. Otherwise, this opportunity would have been stolen by his battle-hungry companions again. The Abyss Celestial King stepped forward, and said, "A bunch of naive youths." His title was Buddhist Cloud, and he didn't rank highly among the Third Heaven Celestial Kings. He was only at the early stage of the Third Heaven. Thus, he had occupied a treasured tower with another Celestial King of similar strength. However, this was only a group of First Heaven Celestial Kings that he could dispose of with a casual wave of his hand, so he naturally didn't feel worried at all. Ling Han wore a faint smile as he looked at the Abyss Celestial King, saying, "This matter has nothing to do with you. But I want to interfere. Do you have any complaints?" the Abyss Celestial King said with a loud laugh. These outsiders were far too arrogant. Did they think they could look down on everyone just because they were monarch tiers or monarch stars? More than just cultivation aptitude, cultivation level was also important. Ling Han shook his head, and said, "So you insist on poking your head forward for a beating? You've asked for this yourself." "Impudence," the Buddhist Cloud Celestial King roared. Boom. Boundless divine light erupted from his body, and a Buddhist halo also materialized behind his head. It was as if he had truly transformed into a Buddha that was going to subdue spirits and eliminate demons. Ling Han turned around to glance at Ji Wuming. He was the ancient ancestor of Buddhism. However, Ji Wuming remained calm and uninterested. Instead, it was Shichanzi who whispered, "Oh, 3 epochs ago, a disciple of ours entered the celestial path, yet never exited again. As it turns out, he didn't die. Instead, he was trapped here and even became a celestial king." In other words, the Buddhist Cloud Celestial King was truly a disciple or grand disciple of Ji Wuming. Ling Han nodded in understanding. Even though Ji Wuming hadn't spoken, he still decided to show some mercy. This was to give Ji Wuming some face. "Come," Ling Han said as he gestured with his finger. He and Ji Wuming viewed each other as competitors, so he was now viewing this Buddhist cloud celestial king as a junior, even though the latter's cultivation level was higher. "You're truly trying to defy the heavens," the Buddhist cloud celestial king said, laughing with rage. He leaped up, genuinely appearing like a Buddhist cloud as he descended toward Ling Han. Boundless divine light shone into the surrounding. He was going to crush Ling Han to death without launching a single attack. Chapter 2483, Who's the Clown? Chapter 2483, Who's the Clown? "Please wait, friend Buddhist cloud," a celestial king suddenly exclaimed, blocking his path. He was a middle-aged man who had an innocent and handsome expression. There was a single ribbon of iridescent light around him, signifying that he was a first heaven celestial king. A first heaven celestial king dared to block a third heaven celestial king? The Buddhist cloud celestial king faltered for a moment before saying, "Perhaps you recognize this brat, so you're stepping forward to speak for him?" He was only willing to stop because this celestial king belonged to his force. Even though he was only at the first heaven, he still had to give him some face. The first heaven celestial king smiled, and said, "Of course not. However, he's only a first heaven celestial king, so I feel like there's no need for friend Buddhist cloud to personally deal with him." These words fed the Buddhist cloud celestial king's ego, and made him feel extremely satisfied. His chubby cheeks shook as he laughed loudly, and he said, "All right, then retrieve this brat's head as a present for friend Dark Frost." "Gladly," the celestial king said with a slight bow. Before a third heaven celestial king, he still had to maintain a certain level of respect. The Dark Frost celestial king saw all of this, yet he showed no signs of stepping forward to interfere. In fact, he was eagerly waiting for the Buddhist cloud celestial king to be humiliated. That way, he would be forced to stand on his side. The ninth descent celestial king also smiled faintly, yet he also didn't step forward to stop the conflict. He was curious to find out just how powerful Ling Han had become. The first heaven celestial king stepped forward, a cold and baleful expression in his eyes as he gazed at Ling Han. He was called Liu Shi, and he had originally come from the celestial realm. He was only a king tier, and he had come to the celestial path in search of a rare opportunity. The first few times he had come, he had adventured in the outskirts of the celestial path, leaving before the 10,000-year limit expired. The final time he had come, however, he had recklessly adventured deeper, following others across the sea. Nonetheless, even though he succeeded in crossing the sea, he failed to become a celestial king within 10,000 years. Thus, he was unable to teleport away. He was trapped here, yet the heavens suddenly shone favor on him, allowing him to find and ingest a celestial medicine that greatly improved his cultivation aptitude. After several billion years of difficult cultivation, he finally broke through to the celestial king tier. Thus, Liu Shi greatly detested prodigies. In any case, he couldn't leave this place anymore, so he decided to specifically target outsiders in order to soothe his disappointed heart. Ling Han shook his head, looking back and asking, "Who wants to battle him?" First heaven celestial kings couldn't elicit his desire to do battle. The Rain Emperor, Ji Wuming, Hu Niu, and the others all shook their heads. They couldn't be bothered fighting a first heaven celestial king. There was no fun and challenge at all. Ling Han involuntarily sighed. Since no one volunteered, he had no option but to step forward himself. After all, who told him to jump out first? However, Liu Shi didn't understand this dynamic, and he thought that these people were afraid of him. He couldn't help but roar with laughter. He leaped forward, summoning the great Tao of fire and transforming it into a blade that slashed down at Ling Han. "A measly new celestial king dares to act so wantonly? Let me teach you some discipline." He dashed forward, and he was truly very nimble. He instantly arrived before Ling Han. Ling Han raised his hand, completely ignoring the flaming blade. His hand pierced through the flames and directly latched onto Liu Shi's chest, slamming him to the ground. Peng! Liu Shi was instantly smashed into the ground, with stars spinning before his eyes. He faltered for a brief moment, and when he finally wanted to crawl up, he discovered that there was a humongous weight on his chest, preventing him from moving. Looking down, he realized that there was a foot on his chest. Moreover, It was this foot that was preventing him from moving. At this moment, his memories came flooding back. Gasp! He had been defeated in a single strike. When this thought flashed through his mind, he felt so embarrassed that he wanted to die. Just then, he had still been boasting with arrogance, saying that he would teach Ling Han some discipline. Now, however, he had been defeated in a single strike. A genius idea suddenly occurred to him, and he immediately pretended that he had been knocked unconscious. He cocked his head and fell limp to the ground. The celestial kings were all astonished upon seeing this. Even though Liu Shi wasn't especially strong, he was still a first heaven celestial king, after all. Even those at the peak stage of the first heaven wouldn't be able to defeat him with such ease. It's due to the difference in their aptitude, a third heaven celestial king said. The other celestial kings nodded in agreement. Ling Han was most likely a prodigy among the outsiders. Perhaps he was a monarch tier, or maybe even a rumored monarch star. Because of this, he was able to easily defeat a first heaven celestial king as a newly advanced celestial king. However, the third heaven celestial kings thought nothing more of this. Regardless of how freakish Ling Han was, he would still be limited by his cultivation level. At most, he would only possess a battle prowess at the early stage of the second heaven. It couldn't be any higher. Another celestial king stepped forward and said, "Humph, hurry up and release him." There were 2 ribbons of iridescent light around him, and it was clear that he was a second heaven celestial king. Since he was willing to step forward, he was naturally confident that he could achieve victory. With a cultivation at the peak stage of the second heaven, could he not defeat a first heaven celestial king? The third heaven celestial kings all nodded in satisfaction. This celestial king was called Ma Dang, and he was extremely renowned among the second heaven celestial kings. Many people believed that he would eventually advance to the third heaven. This was only a matter of time. Since Ma Dang has stepped forward, he'll be able to handle all of them with ease, a celestial king remarked. There's no need to waste too much effort on these younglings. What I'm curious about is, why did they dare to charge over? I refuse to believe that there's no one supporting them in the background. Indeed. There's definitely a scheme behind all this. The third heaven celestial kings all nodded in agreement. Prodigies who could become monarch tiers or even monarch stars were no fools. They clearly knew that this was a dangerous location, yet they still insisted on charging over head-on. There was definitely someone supporting them. Perhaps they were being directed by the other third heaven celestial kings? As they discussed this, Ma Dang launched his first attack. He remained standing in the same spot, and he simply made a tapping motion with his finger. Boom! A ginormous meteor crashed down from the sky, crashing toward Ling Han. It carried with it the great Tao of Earth, and it yearned to crush Ling Han to smithereens. Not only that, but the earth around Ling Han also changed drastically. The gravitational force increased immensely, and just this alone was enough to push ordinary first heaven celestial kings to tears in despair. Ling Han naturally wouldn't have any reaction to this. However, it was impossible for Liu Shi to continue feigning unconsciousness. He instantly started to wail in agony. However, because he was being stepped on by Ling Han, he was completely unable to move. He could only flail his arms and legs as blood gushed from his mouth. It was indeed difficult for second heaven celestial kings to kill first heaven celestial kings who were intent on fleeing. However, Liu Shi was rendered immobile by Ling Han's foot now, so how could he flee? Staring at the fast-approaching meteor, Liu Shi was so terrified that his face became green with terror. If he were struck, he would suffer severe wounds even if he weren't killed. He would definitely end up in a miserable state. Fuck. If you want to die, then go die yourself. Why drag me along? Liu Shi wanted to cry, yet no tears were forthcoming. At this moment, he truly regretted his decision to step forward. Fuck. A third heaven celestial king had already stepped forward, so why had he insisted on snatching the job? As he stared at the meteor in the sky, all of his past experiences flashed before his eyes. If he were given another chance, he would definitely become a carefree celestial king. Just how relaxing and enjoyable would that be? What was the point of thinking about all this useless **t? Even though he wouldn't be able to leave the celestial path, first heaven celestial kings were still powerful enough to wander around as they pleased. In any case, even if he returned to the outside world, there would still be ninth heaven celestial kings above him. As such, what standing would he have? He truly shouldn't have given in to greed. He truly shouldn't have participated in this mess. However, it was a shame that it was already too late to have any regrets. Hang on. Liu Shi was already about to close his eyes to await his inevitable demise. However, he suddenly discovered that the meteor in the sky was traveling at an incredibly slow speed. Perhaps time slows down when someone is about to die. Chapter 2484, Fighting over the Celestial Tool. Chapter 2484, Fighting over the Celestial Tool. The regulations of time, a celestial king said in a solemn voice. His expression was as grave as could be. The other celestial kings remained silent. However, their eyebrows were also slightly raised in shock. Even though all regulations became equal at the celestial king tier, the regulations of time and the regulations of space still enjoyed a transcendent standing. This was mainly because they were extremely difficult to master. Even ninth heaven celestial kings could only peek at the secrets of these two types of regulations if they ingested the necessary celestial medicines. The regulation of time was far too difficult to comprehend and master. Yet, how had a measly first heaven celestial king mastered the regulations of time? Moreover, it was so powerful that it could even affect a second heaven celestial king. In the sky, the meteor descended at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. It was unfathomably slow. In fact, they had enough time to drag a bed over and take a hearty nap. They could then pack away the bed and calmly leave the area. At this moment, Liu Shi's agonized wails became slightly shrill and jarring. He was clearly a celestial king, yet he was wailing with such despair and grief even though he wasn't in any immediate danger. Was this not a joke? Meanwhile, Ma Dang trembled in apprehension. He finally understood that Ling Han's strength couldn't be estimated based on his cultivation level. Otherwise, he might truly be defeated by this newly advanced celestial king. He wore a solemn frown as he gazed at Ling Han. He then took a deep breath, deciding to unleash his true power. At this moment, Liu Shi finally came to his senses. He immediately shut up. However, it was already impossible for him to feign unconsciousness. His face immediately became beet red, and he felt as embarrassed and ashamed as could be. The others could hold back their laughter, but Hu Niu was someone who didn't abide by any rules. She immediately clutched her stomach in laughter. Moreover, her wanton laughter grew louder and louder. Great earth shatter, 8-word art, Ma Dang said with a solemn humph. He finally unleashed his trump card. The earth instantly rumbled, and it was as if it were about to shatter. Countless earthen spikes also shot out from the ground, yearning to impale and kill Ling Han. However, the first person to suffer the consequences was Liu Shi. He was completely unable to dodge. Even though he fully activated his defenses, how could he block a full power attack of a second heaven celestial king? His body was instantly impaled, causing blood to drench the surroundings. This was a bloody and brutal sight. However, Ling Han didn't pay any heed to this, allowing the earthen spikes to shoot over as they pleased. He remained calm and unmoving. With his current power, as long as he channeled the regulations to protect his body, were the attacks of second heaven celestial kings not akin to child's play? He clasped his hands behind his back, smiling at Ma Dang, and saying, "Do you have a more powerful technique?" Great earth shatter, celestial bodies descend. Ma Dang roared. Boom. He unleashed another powerful attack, summoning celestial bodies that crashed down in an apocalyptic manner. Ling Han smiled faintly as he launched a fist at the sky. Regulations fluctuated, and the celestial bodies all shattered in unison. They transformed back into regulations, dispersing back into heaven and earth. "Anything else?" he asked. Ma Dang trembled slightly. What the hell is wrong with this celestial king? He's as bloody powerful as a third heaven celestial king. Even though he still had some trump cards, Ling Han had dealt with his previous attacks with far too much ease. Thus, Ma Dang couldn't help but feel that his attacks would be useless, regardless of how many times he unleashed them. It was simply impossible to contain Ling Han. Upon seeing Ma Dang stop, Liu Shi finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had truly been afraid that he would be killed by Ma Dang. After all, would you look? There were still numerous spikes piercing his body, and his blood was still flowing into the surroundings. He couldn't be any more miserable. Ling Han cracked a grin, and said, "It's my turn now." He ferociously summoned the divine demon sword, tossing it forth like a throwing knife. Pu. As if ignoring time, as if transcending the notion of time, the divine demon sword arrived before Ma Dang in a flash. It then pierced into his forehead, nailing him to death. Fuck. A second heaven celestial king had died, just like that. Would you look? Ma Dang's eyes were still wide with shock and disbelief. Indeed, who could believe this? A second heaven celestial king had actually been killed in a single strike by a newly advanced celestial king? Heh. Ah. The third heaven celestial kings all turned around to stare at Ma Dang. This naturally wasn't because they were attracted by his manner of death. Instead, they were all staring at the sword embedded in his forehead. "Celestial tool," they exclaimed. They were all enticed by what they saw. Expressions of greed washed over their faces, and they all immediately lunged at Ma Dang, fighting for the divine demon sword. The might of celestial tools was transcendent. The Dark Frost Celestial King was especially fervent in his pursuit. He had suffered immensely at the hands of celestial tools. Moreover, if it hadn't been for her celestial tool, he could have definitely suppressed Hua Furong. He wouldn't have been obstructed by her, and he wouldn't have lost his territory. The other celestial kings had never possessed or perhaps even witnessed celestial tools before. Thus, they only had a general concept about its strength. As a result, even though they all rushed forward, no one was as fervent as the Dark Frost Celestial King. This was especially the case for the Ninth Descent Celestial King, who hung around at the very back. Even though he had only met Ling Han once before, he had a very deep understanding of this youth. Ling Han smiled faintly. Wang. The divine demon sword immediately awoke, unleashing a chilling light into the surroundings. At the same time, a murderous aura soared into the sky. This was a vicious weapon. Whoosh. With a ring, the divine demon sword immediately obliterated Ma Dang's head. Radiating with a boundless glow of murder, it then turned to point at the group of celestial kings. Like a waterfall, celestial light came crashing down. The celestial kings faltered for a moment before resuming their fight for the celestial tool again. The more powerful the divine demon sword was, the more they desired to obtain it. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The divine demon sword unleashed its might, with its sword light searing as it swept through the surroundings. What did it matter that it was being attacked by numerous celestial kings? They were completely unable to block its might. Even though they were surrounding the divine demon sword, they were completely unable to suppress it. This was akin to a group of ordinary mortals trying to stop a raging bull. How could they stop it? How? To defeat the enemy, defeat their general first, a third heaven celestial king said. Some of you go over to suppress that brat. Once he dies, the celestial tool will become masterless. At that time, it won't be so difficult to obtain. We vow to only fight for the celestial tool after the brat has been killed. The celestial kings reached a consensus. However, there was also an exception: the Ninth Descent Celestial King. He clasped his hands behind his back as he stepped back from the battle. He smiled, and said, "This wasn't included in our alliance agreement. Please excuse me for not participating." The other celestial kings were all astonished upon hearing this. However, on second thought, it was definitely a good thing that there was one less competitor for the celestial tool. Thus, they didn't pay much attention to this. They continued their attempts to suppress the divine demon sword. Meanwhile, two of the celestial kings charged toward Ling Han. One of them was none other than the Buddhist Cloud Celestial King. This celestial king couldn't help but sigh with emotion. After all this commotion, it was ultimately still he who had to suppress Ling Han. That being the case, why had they wasted so much time and effort just then? Foolish brat, "Accept your death," the obese celestial king roared as he charged over. He summoned a great Dao, using it as a demon-subduing staff as he smashed it down at Ling Han's head. "Let me deal with him," Ji Wuming suddenly shouted. Without waiting for Ling Han's reply, he had already charged over. Wang! A burst of celestial light shot into the sky. He also summoned his celestial tool. In the past, this had only been an immortal weapon. However, following his advance to the celestial king tier, he naturally refined this sword into a celestial tool as well. Now, the might of the divine metal was fused with his martial intent, allowing it to unleash an unfathomable power. The Buddhist cloud celestial king was astounded. This was another celestial tool. However, he was immediately overcome with wild joy. This brat had actively come over to gift him a celestial tool. Haha. He would gladly accept this offer. The two of them instantly engaged in an intense battle. In terms of strength, Ji Wuming was actually quite a bit weaker than Ling Han, with his vitality index only just passing 8,000. However, once he summoned his celestial tool, things would be completely different. Chapter 2485 Fatal Strike. Chapter 2485 Fatal Strike. Hua Furong was unwilling to be left out of the action, and she also retrieved her celestial tool as she charged into battle. Her battle prowess was even more terrifying, and as she unleashed the might of her ancient mirror, she was fearless as she crashed and bulldozed through the group of celestial kings. Meanwhile, Ling Han used his bare fists to battle against a third heaven celestial king. This person was none other than the Red Snow Celestial King. He was at the late stage of the third heaven, and his battle prowess was no weaker than the Dark Frost Celestial Kings. Moreover, he also practiced the Great Tao of Water, and his power was simply terrifying. With a single wave of his hand, red snow would fall from the sky. Even third heaven celestial kings would scream in agony if they were struck by a single snowflake. Facing such an opponent, even Hua Furong would need to use her celestial tool to keep the battle on even terms. However, Ling Han simply swung his bare fists. With him unleashing both his power of regulations and body art together, his battle prowess directly soared to 8,500. Even though this was still inferior to the Red Snow Celestial King, he could at least keep the battle competitive. This caused the Red Snow Celestial King to suck in a sharp breath. This was a newly advanced Celestial King, yet he could already rival him without using a celestial tool? Who could believe this? This was far too terrifying. If this brat cultivated for a few more years, and if he advanced to the second heaven, if they fought again at that time, would he not be obliterated in just a few exchanges? The Red Snow Celestial King brimmed with killing intent. Since he had already offended this supreme prodigy, he was better off killing him as soon as possible. Otherwise, if Ling Han developed further, he would definitely suffer grave consequences. Kill. The Red Snow Celestial King unleashed his full battle prowess, intent on killing Ling Han. Ling Han was filled with confidence as he unleashed his fists of fury. His devastating aura surged, with just a single pulse of it able to force an ordinary Celestial King to vomit blood. He roared with laughter. However, he suddenly retreated, entering the region enveloped by purple light. Humph. Even if you flee to the edges of the realm, you still won't escape death today, the Red Snow Celestial King said with a cold chuckle. He immediately pursued Ling Han. Even though the purple light would suppress his battle prowess, it would equally suppress his opponent's battle prowess as well. Moreover, he also possessed subduing purple fruits, so if it really came to it, he could simply ingest one. That being the case, what was there to be afraid of? The two of them continued to do battle. However, the intensity of their battle was naturally far inferior to before. Under the suppression of the purple light, their battle prowess continued to decline rapidly. However, the Red Snow Celestial King was truly being suppressed, while Ling Han was only pretending to be suppressed. After all, his body art wouldn't be affected by the suppression of the purple light. He was simply performing an act to trick the Red Snow Celestial King. Their battle prowess continued to decline, and before long, their battle prowess had already fallen to less than 1/10 of what it had originally been. If this were in the outskirts, this would be the lowest that their battle prowess fell. If they stayed there any longer, it would no longer be their battle prowess that was suppressed. Instead, the purple light would start to damage their body. However, things were different in the central region. Here, their battle prowess could continue to decline. 1/15th, 1/20th, 1/50th. Their battle prowess continued to decline at an astonishing rate. The red snow celestial king didn't ingest his subduing purple fruit. This was because he only had a limited number of such fruits. Moreover, the rumored great opportunity still hadn't appeared yet. At that time, he would inevitably need to battle again. As such, the more subduing purple fruits he possessed, the better. In any case, his battle prowess was superior to Ling Han's. Regardless of how much they were suppressed, as long as Ling Han didn't ingest a subduing purple fruit, he wouldn't ingest one, either. A fruit saved was a fruit earned. Meanwhile, Ling Han was waiting for an opportunity. He was waiting for an opportunity to deliver a fatal strike. Moreover, this was his only opportunity. Afterward, the others would all realize that his battle prowess wasn't affected by the purple light. Thus, he wouldn't be able to trick them into danger anymore. 1/80th, 1/90th, 100th. It's time. Ling Han suddenly unleashed his power, activating the devastating might of his body art. It was completely unaffected by the purple light, and his battle prowess immediately soared to the peak stage of the third heaven. He launched a punch, one that was filled with killing intent and carried a boundless might. The red snow celestial king's eyes widened in shock. Not in his wildest dreams had he imagined that Ling Han would suddenly unleash such an overwhelming battle prowess at this time. This was simply unfathomable. Under his suppression, how could Ling Han have ingested a subduing purple fruit? Even if he had, the red snow celestial king would have definitely witnessed it. At this moment, Ling Han's battle prowess was wild and profound. The red snow celestial king was transfixed with shock. This punch was truly going to kill him. In his current state, how could he block such a ferocious attack? He let out a furious roar, unleashing his full power to block the attack as he retrieved a subduing purple fruit to ingest. He was going to immediately recover his battle prowess. However, it was all too late. Ling Han's fist smashed into the red snow celestial king's face, directly obliterating his mind. A mighty celestial king, a domineering force on the celestial path, was killed just like that. Quang! Heaven and earth shared the grief, unleashing a haze of blood rain. Ling Han retracted his fist. His body was drenched in the blood of a celestial king, causing him to radiate with a harrowing aura akin to that of a primordial demon god. Inside the tower, the celestial kings who were fighting over the divine demon sword all stopped in their tracks. They wore stunned expressions as they stared at Ling Han. This was inconceivable. This was simply inconceivable. Even if it were them, they were certain that they couldn't kill the red snow celestial king in a one-on-one battle. However, Ling Han had succeeded. No, something's not right. That brat doesn't possess a superior battle prowess. Rather, he can maintain his battle prowess under the influence of the purple light, a celestial king said. Even though they hadn't been paying attention to Ling Han just then, as third heaven celestial kings, they could naturally grasp what was going on in their surroundings. With just a little thought, they could immediately realize what was going on. He ingested a subduing purple fruit. Impossible. Red snow isn't that stupid. If his opponent had ingested a subduing purple fruit, he would have definitely done the same. In other words, this brat possesses a unique skill that allows him to remain unaffected by the purple light. Thus, he set a trap for Red Snow. Red Snow died an unjust death. The celestial kings all sighed softly. In terms of strength, the Red Snow celestial king was no weaker than Ling Han. In fact, he was more powerful than Ling Han. However, the result was ironically the opposite. He had been brutally killed by Ling Han. In any case, after realizing this, the other celestial kings would naturally pay more attention to Ling Han. They wouldn't give him another opportunity. However, this region was far too large. If Ling Han insisted on staying here, perhaps they would have to hide in the tower forever. Ling Han waved his hand. Whoosh! The divine demon's sword flew over, with its sharpness so deadly that even the third heaven celestial kings couldn't block it. With an ice-cold flash, the divine demon's sword reappeared in Ling Han's hand. He strode forward with sword in hand, making his way toward the tower. His aura boiled, and his killing intent surged, intertwining together as they soared into the sky. This was utterly terrifying. With the exception of the ninth descent celestial king, the other celestial kings all felt a sense of regret. Why had they offended such a ruthless demon? However, upon further thought, they discovered that the Dark Frost Celestial King's invitation at this time appeared to be far too coincidental. It felt suspiciously like a setup. However, they had already shown such hostility toward Ling Han. They had attempted to steal his treasure, and they had even attempted to kill him. How could they possibly reconcile? If someone had tried everything they could to kill them, yet tried to obsequiously make up for past wrongs when the victims became more powerful, would the latter forgive them? We have to kill him. Today. The Celestial Kings reached a consensus. At this moment, they were thoroughly screwed over by the Dark Frost Celestial King. Ling Han rushed forward with his sword, sending arcs of ice-cold light into the surroundings. No one could rival him. His base vitality index had already reached 8,400. This was equivalent to the peak stage of the third heaven. However, the third heaven celestial kings here were all at least emperor tiers, so their vitality indices were naturally greater than 8,400. They had probably reached a height of 8,600, a level significantly stronger than Ling Han. However, with the divine demon sword, Ling Han immediately became peerless and unstoppable. He was a lone swordsman, yet his domineering attacks sent the celestial kings into a chaotic scramble. The celestial kings were filled with great resentment. They were clearly stronger than Ling Han, yet because they lacked a celestial tool, they were almost unable to rival him. Detestable. Utterly detestable. Chapter 2486, Lending a Hand. Chapter 2486, Lending a Hand. Right now, the celestial kings were stuck between a rock and a hard place. They couldn't retreat. Once they exited the Black Tower, even though the battlefield would become larger and afford them more space to move, they would be suppressed by the pervasive purple light. As a result, their battle prowess would fall drastically. At that time, they would face the danger of being insta-killed by Ling Han. However, if they continued to do battle here, the devastating power of Ling Han's divine demon sword would also eventually wound them. What should they do? After battling for a while, a celestial king finally made up his mind and resolutely fled. In any case, there were others holding Ling Han back for him, so what better opportunity was there to flee? At any rate, they all possessed their own towers. While some specialized in refining alchemical pills or refining tools, others specialized in powerful offensive or defensive abilities. Thus, they wouldn't need to be afraid of Ling Han. With someone setting an example, many others also followed suit. In any case, it would be fine as long as they weren't the last person remaining. With this in mind, a dozen or so celestial kings fled in unison, scattering in different directions. This was a breathtaking sight. More than a dozen third heaven celestial kings were attacking a single newly advanced celestial king, yet in the end, they were frightened off altogether, fleeing with their tails between their legs. Who could believe this? Ling Han didn't waver, and his gaze remained locked on the Dark Frost Celestial King. He could let the others flee, but he definitely couldn't let the Dark Frost Celestial King flee. However, the Dark Frost Celestial King wasn't fleeing by himself. Instead, he was trailing behind another Celestial King. This Celestial King had occupied a precious tower that specialized in offense, so as long as they reached this tower, Ling Han would definitely face death if he dared to attack. Ling Han raised a hand, activating the regulations of space to restrict the surrounding space. He was going to capture the Dark Frost Celestial King. In your dreams, the Dark Frost Celestial King said with a cold humph. He tensed his body, immediately shattering the restrictions around him. He unleashed a roar, yet he showed no signs of wanting to continue the battle. He was extremely resolute. Ling Han's body art wouldn't be suppressed by the purple light, Yet his power of regulations was unable to escape this suppression. He was originally weaker than the Dark Frost Celestial King, so he was naturally still weaker than him now. It was almost impossible for him to capture the Dark Frost Celestial King just by relying on his power of regulations. Thus, he could only rely on his divine demon sword again. Ling Han funneled his power into the blade before violently tossing it forward. Whoosh! Like a comet, the divine demon sword instantly sliced through the air, shooting toward the Dark Frost Celestial King. Peng! The blade struck, and he could see shards of ice and frost crumbling. The sword pierced through the Dark Frost Celestial King's body, yet this was nothing by an ice decoy. This was the life-saving trump card of the Dark Frost Celestial King. Being as powerful as he was, and as prepared as he was, how could he be killed so easily? Ling Han soared over, grabbing his Dark Frost Celestial King with a single hand. With a bound, he then rushed after the Dark Frost Celestial King again. Here, only the sharpness and toughness of the divine demon sword remained unaffected. Its overall might was also greatly suppressed. After all, as long as it drew on the power of regulations, it would suffer suppression from the purple light. This was unavoidable. Thus, Ling Han didn't plan to activate the divine demon sword. He had to rely on his own power to kill the Dark Frost Celestial King. He activated his body art, unleashing a profound strength that was unaffected by the purple light. Peng! With each step, he would leave a crater in the ground. He continued to sprint forward, closing the gap between him and the Dark Frost Celestial King. This was inevitable. After all, the Dark Frost Celestial King was being suppressed by the purple light, causing his strength to continually decline. However, this Celestial King was a resolute person. He immediately ingested a subduing purple fruit, instantly recovering his full strength. The suppression of the purple light became useless, and he once again became a domineering and unstoppable elite. "Old geezer, don't waste my subduing purple fruit," Ling Han shouted. The Dark Frost Celestial King faltered upon hearing this. Had he eaten Ling Han's food? However, he immediately came to his senses. Ling Han was already treating him as a dead person. In other words, his possessions were already Ling Han's spoils. He flared up in incandescent rage. This brat was taking things too far. However, even though he was enraged, he showed no signs of wanting to stop to battle with Ling Han. Instead, he seized this opportunity to increase his speed. Ling Han also ingested a subduing purple fruit, allowing his power of regulations to instantly recover. He accelerated time for himself before performing short-distance teleportation repeatedly. He was as quick as lightning as he shot after the Dark Frost Celestial King. The Dark Frost Celestial King was extremely powerful, so Ling Han's regulations were almost ineffective against him. However, it was a completely different story when cast on himself. His body flashed, and he continued to teleport forward, closing the gap between him and the Dark Frost Celestial King. The Dark Frost Celestial King was extremely alarmed upon seeing this. He had a feeling that he couldn't lose Ling Han. He had to engage in battle. Otherwise, once the effects of the subduing purple fruit wore off, his fate would definitely be miserable. "Friend Chang Song, please lend me a hand. Let's team up to kill this brat," the Dark Frost Celestial King shouted. If he faced Ling Han alone under the suppression of the purple light, he wouldn't feel a shred of confidence at all. Instead, it was very likely that he would be killed by Ling Han. However, the other Celestial King completely ignored him, fleeing as quickly as he could. What an absolute joke! Even the alliance of the dozen or so Celestial Kings had failed to capture Ling Han, so how could just the two of them succeed? Moreover, it was also in such a disadvantageous environment. Could they have any chance at victory? Otherwise, why were they fleeing? At this moment, Ling Han had already drawn close to them. With a wave of his right hand, he launched the divine demon's sword at the Dark Frost Celestial King again. The Dark Frost Celestial King repeated the same trick, replacing his body with a sacrificial ice statue. Even so, his speed was still affected slightly, allowing Ling Han to draw closer again. A chill involuntarily ran down his spine. At this moment, he severely regretted fleeing from the treasured tower. Otherwise, With his battle prowess at the late stage of the third heaven, he would definitely be able to rival Ling Han. At the very least, he wouldn't be suppressed as he was now. However, there was no medicine to treat regret. The Dark Force Celestial King had no intentions of battling to the death, so he drew on all of his power to flee. Whoosh! Right at this moment, a long black shadow suddenly surged over, yearning to wrap around him. The Dark Frost Celestial King humphed coldly. With a thought, he summoned the great Tao of water, transforming it into an ice sword that slashed down at the black shadow. The shadow was easily severed. However, this wasn't the end, and even more black shadows started to shoot over. It was as if they were countless ropes that wanted to entangle him. Even as powerful as the Dark Frost Celestial King was, he would still need to spend some time to sever these black shadows. Thus, with such an obstruction, it wasn't long before Ling Han finally caught up to him. The divine demon's sword slashed down, unleashing boundless celestial light. The Dark Frost Celestial King roared in fury. He truly resented the person who had attacked him from the shadows. However, Ling Han had already arrived, so he had no option but to engage. He turned around to battle with Ling Han. As Ling Han attacked, he was also feeling slightly surprised. Even though he hadn't seen his helper, he was certain that it was Hui. That person had also come. Hui's power was truly devastating. He had already become a celestial king. Even though his vines could barely threaten third heaven celestial kings, his vines were truly far too overwhelming. When he unleashed them, it was as if he were unleashing tens of thousands of first heaven celestial kings at once. This was utterly terrifying. Even a third heaven celestial king had been blocked by him. However, why was Hui helping him? These thoughts flashed through Ling Han's mind. However, he immediately cast them aside to focus on the Dark Frost Celestial King. This time, he wouldn't allow the other party to escape. The Dark Frost Celestial King attacked with his full strength, attempting to force Ling Han back so that he could create a path to escape. However, the effects of the subduing purple fruit were already subsiding, and the suppression of the purple light was causing his battle prowess to decline again. He hurriedly ingested another subduing purple fruit. He had to maintain his peak power. Otherwise, he would definitely be suppressed by Ling Han. At that time, facing the might of the divine demon sword, his fate could only be death. Chapter 2487 Sudden Change. Chapter 2487 Sudden Change. It was extremely difficult to kill third heaven celestial kings. In terms of strength alone, the Dark Frost Celestial King was actually more powerful than Ling Han. He was simply unable to rival the combination of Ling Han and the divine demon sword. Thus, he had no option but to retreat. However, if Ling Han wanted to kill him, that would be an incredibly difficult task. The Dark Frost Celestial King possessed a myriad of techniques and skills, and his mastery of the great Tao of water had already reached a state of perfection. If it weren't for Ling Han's divine demon sword, there would be simply no way that Ling Han could rival him, much less force him into such a desperate state. While the two celestial kings did battle, Hui silently crept over. He still maintained his humanoid form, and he radiated with a heavy aura of death. He was expressionless as he stared at Ling Han and the Dark Frost Celestial King, and it was as if he were staring at two dead people. The Dark Frost Celestial King ingested subduing purple fruit after subduing purple fruit. He was a third heaven celestial king, and one of the more powerful ones at that. He had more so lived here for several thousand years, so he had naturally obtained an astonishing number of subduing purple fruits. Eating them one after another, it was as if he possessed an endless supply. However, each time he tried to break free, he would be either blocked by Ling Han or pushed back by Hui. As a mighty third heaven celestial king, he was actually suffering at the hands of two first heaven celestial kings. Even so, the Dark Frost Celestial King still managed to resist for 7 days. Only then did he exhaust his supply of subduing purple fruit. His battle prowess fell drastically, and he was finally beheaded by Ling Han, ending his life. Ling Han sheathed his sword before turning to Hui, and saying, "What a convenient time to arrive. You possess a great secret that I want to obtain, Hui said without any attempt to hide his intentions. Ling Han involuntarily laughed, and said, "Then you shouldn't have blocked that celestial king just then. If you had teamed up with him to target me, wouldn't you have managed to obtain it?" Hui sneered, and said, "It's impossible for that kind of trash to defeat you. I'd much rather follow behind you to search for an opportunity." To reveal his sinister intentions so readily and confidently. In this entire world, apart from him, perhaps only the large black dog would be like this. That dog and this plant should definitely become sworn brothers. "You're not afraid that I'll kill you first?" Ling Han asked. "You're unable to kill me," Hui said in a serious voice. "Unless you use that thing to kill us both." This person was truly talking big. He was far too confident. However, upon further thought, he did indeed have this right. He possessed countless vines, each of which possessed the battle prowess of a first heaven celestial king. With tens of thousands of them attacking in unison, even third heaven celestial kings would definitely be frightened. Moreover, he could easily hide his true body such that he was the only one who could attack others. That way, he would naturally enjoy an indomitable position. This was indeed a great source of confidence. Ling Han shrugged his shoulders, and said, "Follow me if you so desire." When he exited the celestial path, there would be the large black dog before him and Wally behind him. At that time, it would be Hui's turn to yell in submission. He returned to the Dark Frost Celestial King's main camp, which had naturally been conquered by the others already. However, because it hadn't been marked with Ling Han's divine sense, it naturally couldn't resonate with his other camps. Thus, after Ling Han's return, he immediately replaced the current mark with his own divine sense. However, upon seeing Hui, everyone including Hua Furong revealed an expression of apprehension. This kind of living being was far too powerful, so much so that it shouldn't belong to this world. In any case, conquering this precious tower was extremely beneficial to Ling Han and the others. First of all, this precious tower could attract an astonishing amount of peculiar light and peculiar fragrance. In fact, just this one tower alone could rival the sum of the 8 other towers. Running the 9 towers together, the amount of resources that they could obtain was naturally immense. Secondly, this tower also had another function: it could refine tools. It could refine any kind of tool. Ling Han had obtained the Violet Divine Staff from Yu Wudi, and he had also obtained another celestial tool from Dongfang Rui. He had tossed both of these celestial tools into the furnace of the precious tower to forge new weapons. These 2 celestial weapons were naturally being forged for the Empress and Hu Niu. Otherwise, their battle prowess would be unable to rival that of third heaven celestial kings. Of course, these were only celestial weapons and not celestial tools. The 2 women needed to mark these weapons with their martial intent. Even though this was a tower that specialized in tool refinement, it still took a lengthy 100 years to finally forge the prototypes of the 2 celestial weapons. Afterward, it was up to the 2 women to slowly nurture them. In the meanwhile, Ji Wuming and Hua Furong had both conquered a precious tower of their own. The Rain Emperor was slightly inferior because he didn't possess a celestial tool, rendering him unable to rival powerful celestial kings. Moreover, the Abyss Buddhist Cloud Celestial King surprisingly became a follower of Ji Wuming, and his expression was always as respectful as could be. He looked much like an obedient child. He had most likely learned of Ji Wuming's true identity. Thus, he naturally had to show utmost respect toward his grandmaster. The 2 women spent a great deal of time nurturing their celestial weapons, pushing them toward the level of celestial tools. With the acceleration of time, they would most likely see some progress in the next few years. At that time, they could also each conquer a precious tower for themselves. In fact, the most powerful among them was actually Hui. He was completely unaffected by the suppression of the purple light. It was unknown whether this was because he was also a plant. Here, he was able to unleash his full power. Being as profoundly powerful as he was, this naturally caused the others to feel even greater apprehension. He had also conquered a precious tower for himself. He was waiting for the transfer formation to open so that he could leave before the time limit of 10,000 years expired. At that time, he could wander the world. At the same time, The ruins also continued to silently transform. When there were only 200 years remaining, the small garden in the central region suddenly unleashed a peculiar light, illuminating the world. Was the profound treasure about to appear? According to rumors, a flawless celestial seed existed in this realm. Moreover, there also existed a secret technique that could allow those who had been trapped here for over 10,000 years to leave. Not only that, but there was also an unfathomably valuable treasure. Now that 10,000 years were almost up, it was time for these treasures to appear, right? However, the transference portals remained as dim as always. Only during the final 100 years would they finally activate. They would then remain active for 100 years before falling back into desolation, waiting another 10 billion years for the next cycle. The battle over towers continued to erupt from time to time. After all, there were many more third heaven celestial kings than those that Linghan had fought before. Even though some of them were defeated, they quickly gathered themselves and launched a new wave of attacks, forming alliances if necessary. This resulted in many precious towers changing hands. However, no one dared to attack the towers that belonged to Linghan, Ji Wuming, and Hua Ferong. This was because many of the celestial kings were aware of their might. They were more so aware of their backgrounds. Since they would most likely have to coexist in the celestial realm, it was better that they didn't offend them now. Conversely, however, Hui's territory had been subjected to several rounds of attacks. With that being said, he was far too powerful, and he wrapped his entire body around the precious tower. No one could breach his rock-solid defenses. Year after year passed by. The small garden became increasingly luscious and eye-catching, and each grain of fine soil looked much like a black gem. They radiated with a precious aura, and it was as if they were hiding some paramount treasure. However, it was a shame that no one dared to approach this area. Even Hui didn't dare to get close. He had sent a few vines over before, but all of them had been ruthlessly blown apart. It would be futile regardless of how many vines he sent over. Day after day passed by. At this moment, the precious aura rising from the earth had even started to suppress the might of the purple light. If one ventured near this area, they wouldn't need to ingest subduing purple fruits anymore. Their battle prowess would remain unaffected. Someday, several years later, the precious light suddenly became blindingly brilliant, so radiant that even celestial kings couldn't look at it straight. When this light finally dimmed, what appeared before them was a small tree growing from the ground. This tree grew at an astonishing pace, changing appearances each and every day. In just 3 years, it had already grown into a towering tree. A thick stem hung down, and on it bloomed a pure white flower. This flower then bore a gigantic fruit that was as tall as a human. Moreover, the bottom of this fruit just touched the ground. In fact, this fruit looked just like a human. Chapter 2488, Gigantic Celestial Fruit. Chapter 2488, Gigantic Celestial Fruit. This was a large and mysterious tree that had absorbed the boundless energy of this place. Now, it had produced a fruit in the shape of a human. Would this fruit give birth to a person? Or perhaps this was a ginseng one? The more time passed, the more divine and profound the aura emitted by the fruit became. Even third heaven celestial kings were extremely enticed. If they ingested this fruit, perhaps they could immediately overcome their obstacles and soar to the fourth heaven. Moreover, this tree had grown right next to the transference portal. Was this a sign that as long as one ingested this fruit, they would possess the right to leave even if they had been trapped here? This fruit is so large, so each person should be able to obtain a share. There's no need to shed blood over it, right? A celestial king said. This was mainly because they were afraid of Linghan, Hua Ferong, and the others. These newly advanced celestial kings were absolutely unfathomable. Their raw battle prowess could already rival that of third heaven celestial kings, so with their mighty celestial tools, even third heaven celestial kings had to give them a wide berth. Fortunately, this final region was now overflowing with profound energy, neutralizing the suppression of the purple light. This allowed the third heaven celestial kings to regain some of their confidence. Otherwise, who could rival Linghan? That's right, the celestial fruit is large enough, so there's no need to shed blood over it, another celestial king said in concurrence. Many celestial kings nodded in agreement. If the fruit was only as large as a fist, they would definitely fight tooth and nail for it. Now, however, the fruit before them was truly humongous in size. Moreover, it contained profound energy, enough to satisfy the needs of everyone. If one were overwhelmed to death by the profound energy of the celestial fruit, that would truly be a massive joke. Ling Han gazed at the strange celestial fruit. He had never seen a strange fruit before. He turned to his companions and asked, "What do you guys think?" "It's very strange," Hua Ferong said. She had the appearance of a small girl, yet she was actually the #1 celestial maiden in history. In terms of the power of regulations alone, she was definitely the most powerful among those at the same cultivation level. Even Ling Han was slightly inferior to her. She pondered for a moment before continuing, "What I mean is, how did these celestial kings know that a great opportunity was going to appear here? How did they know there would be a method to leave? Indeed, no one had ever succeeded before, so why did such a rumor exist? Who had first spread this rumor? Moreover, why were the celestial kings so trusting of this rumor? In fact, they had even left behind their own forces to run to this place. In the past few centuries, it could be said that this place had become a sea of blood. Heaven and earth would grieve time and time again, with a celestial king dying every few days. This was an astonishing number of deaths. In fact, most of the celestial kings who had been trapped here throughout the past few epochs had been killed. Of course, many of the celestial kings from the outside world had also lost their lives. Greed was a powerful motivation for cultivators, yet it was also the culprit that led them to their deaths. Ling Han nodded in thought. This was indeed a strange circumstance. He had inquired the 9th Descent Celestial King about it before, yet he was told that this was a prophecy that had been passed down from ancient times. There had once been a divine phenomenon above the ancient site, and the message that it carried had been passed down from generation to generation. Thus, the celestial kings all trusted this unconditionally. In any case, there were only 100 years remaining, so would any sudden change arise in this time? Ling Han felt like this was very likely. After all, he was someone who carried a halo of trouble with him. No matter what kind of strange scenarios he encountered, they would always wound up transforming into disasters. "Hui, what do you think?" Ling Han asked as he looked toward that silent and solemn person. He was also a fellow plant. Even though one was a tree and one was a water vine, they could still somewhat be regarded as distant relatives, right? "I have no thoughts about this," Hui replied in an indifferent voice. However, the fervent look in his eyes had already betrayed him. His expression was like that of a pervert looking at a beautiful woman. He was being dishonest, yet because he had never really interacted with others before, he didn't understand how to conceal his emotions. His expressions often gave him away. Ling Han purposefully said, "Then what if I fight you for the fruit?" "I'll kill you," Hui replied without hesitation. Indeed, this was Hui's true feeling and determination. He was intent on obtaining this fruit. Hui had clearly noticed or sensed something. However, he refused to share this discovery with Ling Han. Anyhow, even though Hui was very powerful, it wasn't as if Ling Han were afraid of him. Right now, his battle prowess was such that even third heaven celestial kings had to give him a wide berth. He truly didn't need to fear anyone. Of course, there was still a sense of apprehension between him, Ji Wuming, Hua Ferong, and Hui. Each was a powerful opponent for another. Time slowly crept by, and more celestial kings arrived at this place. There were few native celestial kings among these newcomers because most of them had already been here since long ago. Most of the newcomers were celestial kings from the outside world, such as Anran, Ailian, Xing Chenyu, and so on. They were all powerful first heaven celestial kings. These people would naturally pick a side as well, with some following Ling Han and some following Ji Wuming. For example, Anran was extremely invested in Ji Wuming, and it was very likely that she had already given her heart to him. However, Ji Wuming hadn't reincarnated for the sake of mortal desires and relationships. His only goal was to become a heavenly venerate. Meanwhile, Huofurong was also a popular choice, especially among female celestial kings. It was said that there were fewer female cultivators. Moreover, the higher the cultivation level, the fewer they would become. However, this place was filled with their silvery voices, and there were surprisingly 100 or so female celestial kings. They didn't seem few in number at all. Xian Rong also arrived. He still had yet to become a celestial king, yet he had seemingly come to some kind of agreement with a third heaven celestial king. His hopes of obtaining the flawless celestial seed were clearly in the hands of this celestial king. Now that Ling Han and Huofurong had already become celestial kings, however, he had far less competition for the flawless celestial seed. Most importantly, apart from Ling Han and the others, he didn't view anyone else as his competitors. Everyone here was waiting. Some people were simply waiting for the transference portal to activate, after which they would immediately leave this place. Meanwhile, others were waiting to fulfill far greater goals. They wanted to obtain a share of the grand treasure that was about to appear. 1 day, 1 month, 1 year. Time silently crept by, stealthy yet astonishingly quick. The final 100 years were about to arrive. At that time, the transference portals would activate, allowing people to return to the celestial realm. However, the closer this moment drew, the more mysterious the towering tree became. It absorbed energy from the surroundings, causing its branches to dance like dragons as they continually funneled energy to the fruit. It could be seen that the mysterious small garden was withering at a rate visible to the naked eye. The crystal-like soil was losing its nutrients, transforming back into ordinary soil. It was clear that the celestial tree was absorbing all of the nutrients of this land, funneling them into the gigantic fruit to transform it into a paramount celestial fruit. Boundless energy flowed into the fruit, releasing a celestial aura. Just how mysterious would this fruit be? Everyone was eager with anticipation. With the final 100 years imminent, the fruit started to undergo even more drastic transformations. It pulsated with a brilliant glow, and it more so emitted the sound of a beating heart. This fruit was humanoid, and now its chest area was more so rising and falling like with the beat of a heart. In fact, through its skin, a heart-like matter was already visible. Each time it beat, the space around it would shudder and ring in a rhythmic and profoundly powerful manner. It was as if this weren't a fruit, but instead a powerful elite. Crack! Fractures suddenly appeared on the skin of the fruit, releasing a boundless and dazzling celestial light. The celestial fruit was about to appear. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,